policía, policía, policía.
Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching Middle East Now on I24 News. Our headlines this hour. Houthi heads will roll. Israel's defense minister vows revenge after the Yemeni terror group fired its third missile at Israel this month. Syria's new rulers say all armed militia must disband and unite behind the new leadership. And the ancient Christian communities of the Middle East prepare to celebrate Christmas. Israel's defense minister has vowed to take action against Yemen's Houthis after they fired yet another missile at Israel overnight. The IDF intercepted it before it entered Israeli airspace, but millions were forced to run to the shelters as the sirens blared in the early hours. Our Bianca Zanini has more.
For the third time in less than a week, sirens sounded across central Israel as Yemen's Iran-backed Houthis fired another missile at Israel overnight. The IDF said the missile was intercepted before it entered Israeli airspace. As the attacks continue, Israel is working to get the Houthis internationally recognized as a terrorist organization and promising to strike back hard.
In recent days, we, Defense Minister Katz and I, have instructed the IDF to attack strategic targets of the Houthi militia in Yemen, in a precise operation, and let me tell you, it is not the first, and it will not be the last. We have destroyed significant terrorist assets that the Houthi militia has used against us.
A senior Houthi official posted on X that their attacks against Israel will not stop until the, quote, aggression against our people in Gaza stops. The Houthis are emerging as the last active and effective arm of Iran, causing damage and injuring Israelis in and around Tel Aviv in the last weeks.
We have dealt a severe blow to the axis of evil, and we will also deal a severe blow to the Houthi terrorist organization in Yemen, which remains the last to stand and fire at Israel. We will damage its strategic infrastructure, and we will behead its leaders.
Israel and the U.S. have been striking back against the Houthis in Yemen and are expected to continue.
Well, to talk more about the Houthis, we're joined by Michael Mulroy. He's the former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, and he joins us tonight from the United States. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. So, I mean, we've had 3 Houthi missile attacks on Israel in the past 10 days alone, even though the Americans have been bombing targets in Yemen. Israel has been bombing targets in Yemen. Nothing seems to be having an effect, though, does it?
So good to be with you and your audience. They are, as you said in your report, the last really intact remaining proxy group of Iran. And they're heavily supplied, of course, by Iran. Many of the missiles that are being launched at Israel and at the commercial ships in the Red Sea originated and are manufactured in Iran, and certainly using Iran technology. So they have been pretty impervious to the pressure that's been mounted, not just by Israel and the United States, but by the entire coalition that's meant to ensure the freedom of navigation through the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. But that doesn't mean that they are going to stay that way. So it could be that now that Hezbollah has been significantly degraded, obviously Hamas as well, and Iran as well, that the international coalition can focus on all kinds of targets in Yemen against the Houthis, and potentially trying to do everything and even more to prevent these missile systems, these really advanced missile systems, to getting into their hands. Well,
let's take a step back and think about how we got to this point. And we remember when President Biden took office, one of the first things that he did was to remove the Houthis from the list of terrorist groups. His administration also put significant pressure on Saudi Arabia and its allies to stop their fight with the Houthis. I mean, looking back, do you think that that helped to embolden the group? Did the Americans help create a monster here?
Well, I think, to be fair, and I do think they should have the terrorist designation. I don't think it should have been removed. But the stated reason why the Biden administration removed it was because of the delivery of humanitarian aid, and they couldn't go through the Houthis to get the humanitarian aid to the civilian population if they had that designation. It seems like there's got to be ways around that, but that's what they said, just to be fair to their point. I do think that pressuring our allies in the region not to basically respond to attacks. So these attacks used to be focused on Saudi Arabia, on the UAE, and they were responding as a result of that. And I do think it did embolden the Houthis once those efforts were finished. It essentially told them that what they did succeeded, and ultimately they prevailed. And whenever you have a group like this, whose sole purpose of existence is to destroy Israel and the United States, the only purpose they have is to fight. So if they feel like they won, then it emboldens them. Yes, absolutely.
Meanwhile, America's allies in Europe and also the United Kingdom, they still don't recognise the Houthis as a terrorist group. Israel is trying to convince them to put them on a list of designated terrorists. Do you think that would help at all if those Western allies were on board?
Yes, because it does put more pressure. It does bring in potentially more sanctions. Those who assist them could be arrested as aiding and abetting a terrorist organization, material support to a terrorist organization. And I guess what I'd ask all those European, some of them which are attacking Houthi positions militarily. So I'm not quite sure how they can justify attacking Houthi positions if they're not even designated a terrorist organization. And it's clear from the evidence that's been reported in every media outlet for months that they're attacking commercial civilian vessels. They've injured and killed civilians. This is a purely terrorist action that's meant for political, gains, which is the definition of a terrorist action. Violence in pursuit of terrorist gains, and it's almost nonstop, and it's against the global community, and it affects countries around the world, not just in the Middle East region. Of course, the Indo-Pacific relies heavily on the energy that comes out of there. So it's clear to me that this group wants to be a terrorist organization, is conducting terrorist attacks every day, and the rest of the world should catch up to that.
One of the ways in which Israel managed to weaken Hezbollah, that other arm of the Iranian axis, was to target weapons deliveries which were going via Syria. Is there no way to stop the Houthis rearming, particularly when their patrons in Tehran have been so significantly weakened?
So that is a good point. Obviously, the fall of the Assad regime cuts off that corridor that Iran's been using to supply the Hezbollah with all their really advanced missile and rocket systems. It's more difficult, quite frankly, if you look at the geography of stopping. You'd have to do a lot of work, but we just have to basically get better at maritime and naval intelligence. We have to be willing to board and search ships, potentially at random if we have to. We have to really look from the intelligence perspective of how these weapon systems are getting there and try to cut them off. And if they've started manufacturing some of these systems, then we have to figure out how they're getting the components, because they're probably not manufacturing the components, and make sure they're not getting into these areas. And then those that do, we have to target before they're actually launched against Israel or against these commercial or military vessels.
And finally, as you mentioned, the Houthis are not just attacking Israel, they are also significantly affecting global trade. Trade routes have had to be changed as a result of Houthi attacks. Egypt is one of the biggest losers from that change in the trade routes. Are we going to see a change when President Trump takes office in January?
Quite possibly. So the International Maritime Security Construct, which today is called the Prosperity Guardian, started under the first administration of President Trump. I think they will look at just how devastating this is, not just to the world economy and obviously those that are physically targeted, but just to the flagrant violation of the rule of law by the Houthis. If the international community can't come together in large numbers and to fight this, and they really can't do that anywhere. This is international waterways, and it has to do with international trade, to include the international trade of energy, around 40% of the world's energy supplies. If that doesn't rally the international community, I don't know what will. So I do think the second Trump administration will look hard at how to do that and really ask individual countries to step up and start contributing in some form or fashion to protect the international waterways and the free flow of commerce.
Michael Mulroy, we appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, let's round things off with our Middle East correspondent, Arin Loan, who's joined us in the studio. And Ariel, the Houthis keep saying that their attacks are linked to the war against Hamas in Gaza. Of course, that is reminiscent of what Hezbollah used to say, and Israel did manage to break that connection. It seems though the Houthis are a bit more determined in their aim.
They're the most determined of all Iranian proxies. As you discussed, they're the last remaining active proxy. But the Houthis are not a threat only to Israel. They're a threat to the entire region. And this isn't coming from me. This is coming from sources in the Gulf who I'm speaking with, who are saying that pretty much there's a lot of frustration regarding U.S. policy in the Middle East in general, but specifically regarding the Houthis, really at the heels of what you just discussed. Now, and it was the Americans who ended the Saudi-led, who asked them to stop the Saudi-led coalition, urging them to end their operation against the Houthis back in 2018. And these same sources in the Gulf say now it's up to the Americans to change the situation. They say we're not willing to clean up their mess for them. They must show that they are serious about establishing a regional coalition to counter the Houthis. However, not all is grim. There is ongoing coordination between Gulf countries in the framework of CENTCOM, the U.S. Central Command. There is limited behind-the-scenes activity and engagement by Gulf actors, but in order for that to come more to the forefront, there needs to be a shift in American policy, specifically regarding the Houthis.
And regarding those Arab countries, of course, we've got, I think it's 28 days now until President Trump is back in the White House. He was the one who brokered the Abraham Accords between Israel and those countries. Is there a sense that they're kind of waiting for a change in Washington before they join a more robust coalition against the Houthis?
There's no doubt that the Trump effect has already led to changes on the ground, but there's also still much anticipation for the re-entry of President-elect Donald Trump into the Oval Office. There's, however, I will say specifically regarding the Houthis, also under Trump, there was disappointment regarding the way he related to these attacks and his support that he gave to countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE. So they're definitely waiting to see what changes he may bring to this American policy, but there's still a lot of apprehension.
That was before they were messing with global trade, though, so I think that might have changed a few things. Ariel, for now, thank you very much indeed. Well, the Houthis, as Ariel pointed out, are the last active proxy in Iran's so-called resistance. And they have been directly attacking Israel. That after the Shiite militia in Iran decided yesterday to down their weapons. Tehran is looking increasingly vulnerable to both external attacks, but also from within, where the population is increasingly angry about widespread energy blackouts. And there are reports that authorities there are preparing for some kind of popular uprising. Well, Camelia Entekabi-Farid is the editor-in-chief of the Independent Persian. Wonderful to see you as always, Camelia. Thank you very much for joining us. So is Iran, first of all, directing the Houthis to attack Israel more robustly, given that they are the last active proxy?
Thank you, dearest Lara, for hosting. Good evening to everyone and Merry Christmas. There is no doubt that we could say the Houthis were Iranian regime's tools to prevent any sort of the peace comings or peace talks impossible in the region to be presented. There are Iranian militias, the representative of the IRGCs in Yemen, that it has been told, or we know that already about it. And without their approvals, without Iranian monies, and without their commands, there is no way Houthis can pursue such an attack. It's possible still Iran wants to play with some of the cards, has it in hands. And I can see that even possible the Russians are involved. That sort of the missiles Houthis were using are much more advanced than the one Iran Islamic Republic were holding. And we read already that it's possible these missiles has been made by Russia. And because of those situations in Ukraine, the whole NATO were engaged against Russia, and Iranians were losing the grounds anywhere in the Middle East. There is a merge of the Russian-Iranian combinations in Yemen today, what we were seeing Houthis were conducting.
Might the regional situation, Camelia, coupled with what's happening inside Iran, namely those terrible power cuts which keep going on, is that likely to prompt an uprising in Iran? And we have got a bit of a strange report which says that Iran is lifting a ban on WhatsApp. What is the sense in that, given that that would enable people to organise protests more easily?
Yeah, all of them are related. I believe 2025 is a turning point for the Islamic Republic regime and for the Iranians. This power cut outrages, it's a continuation of many shortages, mismanagement, bad economy, inflation. All of them is just like a build-up situation which it turned to this problem. And the outrage, the power outrages cause the universities shut down, lots of the factories, and it can, yes, lead to another uprising, but everything is so much depends on President Trump's decision, how he wants to deal with the Islamic Republic, and how behind the scene now the Islamic Republic are negotiating to open a back channel with President Trump to get their survival. There are many reasons we could say the regime were offering olive branches. We were seeing that now publicly admitting some of those proxies, they were not their proxies, they were just supporting them, such as Hezbollah, Hamas, and this morning, the foreign minister Araqchi said even the Houthis were individually acting without our orders. They try having these distances to convince Trump they are open for the negotiations, which everyone knows these groups are the Iranian regime proxies. And they want to survive, and their survival maybe it's to offer many of these proxies were shutting down, negotiation over the nuclears. They understand how difficult their circumstances is in Iran, and the confrontation of the angry mobs Iranian, they can overturn the regime down, and they want to see if there is a possibility they get survive with Trump. And talking about the WhatsApp, you asked me a question. They try to tell Iranian, they open in some different things to convince the people. The government of Pezeshkian is a reformist. He wants to fulfill the promises he told people. The internet filtering would be removed. It's a very little things. If the social media is lifted, Iranian can have more access to the free media. They can read without using the different tools to having an access. That would be works better. But we have to remember, always they can shut down. This opening the WhatsApp and filtering it happened a few times, because whenever there is a demonstration, easily they can filter, and then look, it takes another 2 to 3 years to unfilter. They were thinking Iranian can be fooled by these little achievements. It's too late for them to fix this lots of problem, and I believe we are in the path between year or 2 years for a massive changes in Iran, not by foreign forces, by Iranian people.
So it could be seen as an attempt to placate the population, but a risky move which may very well backfire. Camelia, great to talk to you and great to get your analysis. Thank you very much indeed. Camelia Entekabifad there.
Happy holidays. Thank you.
Thank you. Same to you. Well, Arin Loan is with us in the studio, and this comes, of course, as Israel has for the first time confirmed, probably one of the world's worst kept secrets, that it was behind the killing of the former Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh, who was in Tehran for the inauguration of the president, Pezeshkian. Yeah,
a reminder, July 31st, mysterious explosion rocked IRGC safe house in Tehran in the middle of the night, exploding the bed on which Ismail Haniyeh was sleeping. Obviously, this was immediately attributed to Israeli Mossad, but Israel never took official responsibility for this. Last night, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz saying that Israel will go after the leaders of the Houthis, decapitate their leaders, just as they did with Sinwar, Hania, and Nasrallah, basically confirming for the first time that Israel was behind this assassination. Now, this isn't the first time that Israel Katz himself had confirmed that Israel was behind the elimination of Hania. On Israeli TV about a week or two after the incident, he kind of blurted out a faux pas, so to speak, that Israel was behind it. Then he was pressed on it and he kept silence. This is the first time that Israel is officially confirming it. Interesting that it comes out of the mouth of the defense minister rather than the prime minister or even the IDF.
Ariel, thank you.
Thanks.
Well, our talks to free the hostages continue in Qatar. Meanwhile, an Israeli woman who was kidnapped by Hamas and released as part of a ceasefire deal last November has died. Hannah Katsir was taken from her home in Kibbutz Nir Oz on October 7th. Her husband, Rami, was murdered and her son, Elad, taken captive and later killed. Hannah's friends say her heart never recovered from the pain. She was 78 years old. That's Hannah Katsir, former hostage. Well, for more on the hostage talks, our Balir Saladin is down at Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. And Balir, we heard from the Prime Minister yesterday, didn't we, saying that there had been some progress. Any updates today?
Well, updates today, but not in the positive way, at least not for anybody that wants to see the hostages back as soon as possible. Today, sources in Israel are saying that Yahya Sinwar's brother, the de facto leader of the Gaza Strip of Hamas in Gaza today, Mohammed Sinwar, is actually not being serious in his negotiations. The sources are saying that they are irritated by the way he actually deals with the negotiations that are ongoing now in Doha. They are saying that he is not serious with the mediators and he is refusing, which is very important, refusing to give Israel or the mediators the list of hostages that would be released in case of a deal, and also is going backwards on some of the promises and the agreements that he already gave during these or this cycle of negotiations. So we're saying that the positive atmosphere or the lots of hopes that we've been witnessing throughout the past week or two are now a little bit not going in the right way, and the sticking points are still the same, more or less. We're still talking about the Hamas's refusal of giving the list of hostages, and also the discussion about what to do with the leaders of the Palestinians prisoners that would be released from jail in case of a deal. Israel wants them to be expelled outside of Israel. Hamas is saying that we can agree to only Hamas's leaders or those who are aligned with Hamas would be expelled. The others should stay in Gaza or the Palestinian territories in general. And also the fact that the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, is asking right now for adding 11 male hostages. We're talking about maybe the civilians, not the soldiers, in the first phase of the deal. They don't belong to the humanitarian phase, but that's something that is in discussion right now, and there's no agreement upon as well.
All right, no good news today. Balir, thank you very much indeed. Balir Saladin there. And a reminder, 100 hostages are still being held in Gaza. Dozens of them are believed to be still alive. Our Lim Plachmeier has more.
An art activist in Israel is using an eye-catching installation to plead for a hostage release deal.
My message is to bring back all of them, and after that we can go back to life.
The installation by 51-year-old Hila Galili is a call to incoming US President Donald Trump to secure a hostage deal before Christmas, and features demonstrators dressed as Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Because they think he has the power of a baby. He can force him to do it. Yeah. And he will do it.
Galili is a former industrial designer who began advocating for human rights and women's rights in early 2003 through her art. After Hamas militants killed 1,200 people and abducted more than 250 hostages to Gaza on October 7, Galili shifted her focus to the hostages. Over the past 15 months, she has created more than 80 art exhibits addressing the hostage crisis.
It's like Sinwar and Bibi are playing with us matkot. In the beach, Israelis play matkot, and this game is without winning. And actually what's happening in this situation, no one wins.
In her garage studio, Galili surrounds herself with art props made from hostage photos.
I believe that picture is like, like more than 1,000 words. And they tell, I can tell by doing my installation the thing that I want to say, and it's split all over the world. And this is the reason why I'm doing it.
As the holiday season approaches, Galili is hopeful that her art will inspire action while 100 hostages remain held captive in the Gaza Strip.
Angry, exhausted and disappointed, the wives of Israeli soldiers are calling on the ultra-Orthodox community here to help their families as their husbands are called to reserve duty for many months at a time. Our Alfie Moore has the story.
Exhausted by more than 14 months of war, the wives and mothers of Israeli soldiers are uniting in protest against exemptions from conscription for ultra-Orthodox men.
We have been standing here for a month and a half asking for help from our brothers who live here to come and lend a hand, a shoulder, share the burden with those who have been in reserves for endless days, weeks and months.
The Reservists' Wives Forum is a group advocating for broader conscription, including from Israel's ultra-Orthodox community, which is currently exempt from military service.
The ultra-Orthodox are ultimately just one group within the population that needs to be part of this. We need to find a way to ensure that their way of life is respected and not harmed, while creating the appropriate and proper framework to make this happen.
Without the conscription of the ultra-Orthodox male community, more responsibility is falling on the rest of society and resulting in longer reserve service times, thus providing added stress for families, especially in times of war.
My husband has been on reserve duty for almost an entire year. The burden on our family is very, very heavy. And we see that there is an entire segment of society who are not taking part and not enlisting in reserve duty.
The belief of many is that there should not be a distinction between studying Torah and serving in the military.
Time for a break. When we come back, Syria's new leaders are calling on all the armed militia to disband and unite behind the new rulers in Damascus. We'll have the details for you next. Stay with us.
It started on October 7th, but for many, the horror may never end. With homes destroyed, families displaced, hostages missing, soldiers fallen, and a country traumatized. In the first year alone, more than 17,000 Israelis have been wounded, and hundreds of thousands have experienced psychological trauma and need support now. Thankfully, for 112 years, Hadassah hospitals have been on the ground healing. At our expanding Gandel Rehabilitation Center, we're providing critical physical therapy and life-changing mental health services.
Hadassah is a great place.
Today I'm really thankful.
Now, some are back home, living their lives, but many more still need our help. Help your family and friends heal at Hadassah hospitals. Give today.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
Welcome back. 2 weeks after the fall of the Assad regime in Syria, celebrations in some places have turned to protest as uncertainty looms over the country's future. Women, Kurds and Christians have been rallying against the new Islamist rulers in Damascus, demanding equal rights and protection for their communities. More in this report.
In Kamishli, on the border with Turkey, thousands of women took to the streets, rallying for their rights under Syria's new Islamist-led government. They wave the green flags of the Women's Protection Units, a symbol of resistance and gender equality during years of Kurdish-led autonomy in the north.
We are demanding women's rights from the new state. Women must not be excluded from the system.
There is a widespread concern among Syrians that the new administration, led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, will gravitate towards hardline Islamist rule, marginalizing minorities and women from public life. Also, in Damascus, Christians are voicing their concerns. Protests erupted after the burning of a Christmas tree in Sukailabia, a Christian-majority town. HTS blamed foreign fighters from the Islamist group Ansar al-Tawhid.
This act was committed by people who are not Syrian, and they will be punished beyond your expectations. The Christmas tree will be fully restored tonight.
De facto ruler Ahmed al-Shara is a former affiliate of al-Qaeda, which sees Christians as infidels. But he has told Christians and other groups that they will be safe in Syria. But many Christians remain skeptical.
We are monitoring to see if these factions ruling Syria are serious about creating a civil society where all citizens, including Christians, can live freely.
The road ahead for Syria remains uncertain, as its diverse communities struggle to define their place in a post-Assad era. They vow to keep fighting for their rights in what they hope will become a truly inclusive and democratic Syria.
Well, the United States says it will not allow ISIS to take advantage of the situation in Syria, and the US is striking ISIS targets, eliminating several high-level terrorists in recent days. This is America's Kurdish allies warn that they risk losing control of the prisons under their control, which contain thousands of ISIS terrorists and their families. For more on that, we're joined by Scott Stewart. He's the Vice President of Intelligence at the group Torchstone Global. Thank you very much for being with us. So, first of all, how much of a concern is the potential rise of ISIS in Syria?
Well, I think after what we saw in 2013 and 2014 with like their last rise to power, I think it really is a concern. And it's certainly one that the United States is not taking its eye away from. We saw what happened the last time America had withdrawn from the region. They had taken their forces out of Iraq, and that really left a vacuum there of capability, which allowed the Islamic State, they were aided a lot, of course, by the Syrian regime, who released a lot of jihadis from prison. But then they were able to kind of use that to snowball into some prison breaks in Iraq, and then really, grab large parts of Syria and Iraq as part of that evolution.
Well, the incoming National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, has given an interview, and he says that America's priority is to prevent a prison breakout of the sort you've just described. Now, America's Kurdish allies are crying out for help. They say they're under attack from Turkish-backed forces, and they say that they are at risk of losing control of the prisons. Should America be supporting them better?
Well, certainly, there are some politics there as far as the Kurds are concerned. They do want as much help as they can get in order to protect themselves from Turkey and its allies. They've been under attack from the Turks, for a long time now. But at all that said, the prisons are a concern. And if we have, thousands of Islamic State fighters and their families breaking out of these prisons, it really does, pose the potential for another resurgence of the group in the area, and certainly nobody wants that to happen. So I'm hopeful that the Americans will support the Kurds and that they will be able to ensure that especially the hardcore militants don't break out of these prisons. But certainly these prisons aren't a long-term solution, right? There has to be something done in order to just prevent this festering sore of jihadism to continue in these camps. So there needs to really be a larger picture, some de-radicalization programs, some other political things to ensure that this, hotbed of jihadism doesn't continue to fester and grow in the camps.
Right. A lot of European citizens in those camps, European countries, are not interested at all in taking many of those people back into their countries. But inside Syria, HTS is now the most powerful group. It is not the only militia operating in the country, though. What intelligence does the US have about the number of Sunni Islamist groups now in power in Syria?
Well, certainly we saw, again, during that 2013-14, when Islamic State kind of formed that caliphate in Syria and Iraq, they invited jihadists from all over the globe to come and join their experiment, their political experiment. And we really did see that happen with militants coming all the way from, China, Central Asia, North America, Europe, Africa, and elsewhere to the fight. And there really is a wide array of international jihadists in the region. However, one of the things that we have really seen in Idlib specifically over the last several years, which is the area that HTS has governed, is that they were not, really allowing any of these other groups to grow and fester. As a matter of fact, they were at war with the Islamic State, with Al-Qaeda, and with other more militant sects and actors. And actually, they imprisoned and killed a number of actors, and in some cases, when they were afraid of directly acting against them, they would actually leak intelligence to the Americans to conduct airstrikes on significant targets. So they actually used the Americans as a tool as well to get rid of some of these more militant and radical actors.
Scott, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Scott Stewart there at Torchstone Global. Well, meanwhile, over 12,000 refugees are returning to Syria from Jordan. Jordan hosted well over 1 million refugees, and yesterday Jordan's foreign minister was in Damascus to meet with the country's new leaders. Well, to talk more about that and the situation inside Syria, we're joined by Bashar Jarrah. He's a political analyst and media consultant. Thank you very much indeed for being with us on the programme. First of all, how will the fall of the Assad? How will the fall of the Assad regime and the rise of the Sunni Turkish-backed movement that is now taking control, how will that impact Jordan, first of all?
Well, first of all, I would say that Jordan will not look to the Syrian matter as just replacing two regimes. One of them depicted by you as a Sunni Muslim, and the previous one presumably was a secular one. It wasn't the case in both scenarios. As far as Jordan is concerned, it is the 1,300,000 refugees that came into Jordan wave after wave till we had the Jordanians had to deal with a very pressing need to deal with this matter. I believe Mr. Safadi discussed this very matter, with both regimes, the previous one and the current one. In both scenarios, it is the hardship that is not only inflicted on the Syrian refugees, but even more on the Jordanians, as 90% of those refugees do live in cities in Jordan, across Jordan. Only 10% of them live in Azatari. So there is a kind of lack of resources that is affecting everyone, not only the Syrian refugees. To add to this, that now it is more needed for Syrians to go back to their homeland, as now the shape of the new Syria being shaped, and there are a need for those elements to have a say of what kind of a Syria they want. Do they want to replace a dictator with another dictator with a different brand, or they need more stable Syria, a mosaic Syria that reflects all interests, all ethnic groups, and friendly to their neighbors?
So what do you think? Do you think that Ahmed al-Sharar and the government he's appointed, do you think that they will be able to protect minorities and the mosaic of minorities inside Syria?
Well, Laura, I believe we all suffered from lip service. There were politicians who know how to manipulate the language when they address diplomats and when they address media. Now, no one will fall into that trap, because we heard this scenario previously in Egypt. We heard it in several regimes when they collapsed during the so-called Arab Spring. Everyone promised something, but they had the opposite picture, even uglier than previous regimes. For that reason, everyone, starting with the State Department, Barbara Liffey, when she met, she said, well, we heard we need to walk the talk, not only say that the new Syria will not be oppressive and it will represent everyone. Mind you that what happened recently with regard to the Christmas tree in Hamas, it shows something. Now, the response from Ahmed al-Sharar and the HTS...
You're talking about the Christmas tree that was set on fire yesterday near Hamas, yes.
Exactly. Yes, ma'am. The response so far is promising, because it tells that HTS denounced that. They are providing now with security kind of arrangements around churches in Syria. But the big question, why we need to protect Christians who are the authenticity of Syria and this region, this part of the world, by people who raise kind of a violent struggle against a foreign dictatorship and sponsored by Turkey. And we all know that Turkey is playing with those cards for several considerations, including the Kurds. So it is not only the new Syria that needs to be tolerant toward ethnicities, because the fabric of Syria has to be that, without any need for additional security arrangements, be it for Muslims, Shia, Alawites, Christians, whatever is called a Syrian should be protected by law.
What about the issue of foreign influence then over Syria? Because we know Iran and Russia have very abruptly been kicked out of the country. But is there a risk that other countries, Turkey and Qatar, who were the first to send their diplomats to Syria and who have announced a significant investment in Syria, might they be taking those countries' place and exerting their influence now over future Syria?
To be honest with you, Laura, this is a wide discussion. Everyone is discussing. Are we seeing those who participated in a way in the so-called uprise, and then became a revolution, then a militant movement, then a part of the jihadi movement across the region? Are we replacing the Iranian kind of proteges inside Syria with the Turkish ones? This is a kind of a dialogue that I believe needs to be resolved not by diplomatic Arab diplomacy, as Mr. Safadi was referring, and before that, the American delegation who met HTS. It is something that the Syrians themselves need to decide. Do they look for a united country by a constitution that protects everyone, that mosaic, that beautiful mosaic? Or we are going to go under the wings of and these kind of gestures that we see obviously from a Turkish foreign minister who was head of intelligence. The whole Idlib formula was protected by kind of arrangements between the Turks, Russians, and to some extent other regional players, including Arab countries. Now, after Aqaba meeting, the regional Aqaba meeting, it is calling on Syrians to get everyone who is not Syrian, non-Syrians, to be out of the country. Now, what al-Shara did, he is now saying that unifying all militants under the umbrella of the new Syrian army. So once again, what will be the ideology of the new Syrian army? What will be the remnants of the fallen regime? Are they going to be assimilated, digested in that formula or not? Even the rumors that there would be two bases for Turkey in Homs and in Damascus, it's really very alarming, because then we are back to square one.
You raised some very interesting points, sir. Great to talk to you. Thank you very much. Bashar Jarrah there.
Thank you, Laura.
The Taliban has welcomed Saudi Arabia's decision to reopen their embassy in Kabul. Most countries closed their missions after the Taliban seized power in the wake of a chaotic withdrawal by the United States in 2021. No country formally recognises the Taliban as the legitimate rulers of Afghanistan, though some countries do have unofficial diplomatic ties. Well, let's go to Kabul now, and we're joined by journalist Shakib Nazari. Good to see you, Shakib. So how will this move by Saudi Arabia benefit the Taliban?
It has lots of benefits for the Taliban, but the two benefits are the more important for the Taliban, because Saudi Arabia is one of the biggest and influential Muslim countries, and affects especially on the legitimacy of the Taliban on global stage, beside to the other Muslim countries. And also Saudi Arabia is one of the best supporters in the past 20 years for the most of the Muslim countries, and it may affect the Taliban on the financial supports too.
And meanwhile, how is the Taliban's relations with other countries in the region, especially its neighbours such as Iran and Pakistan?
I can say it's a little bit complex, because Taliban are like the Sunni Muslims, and the Iran governments like Shia, and it has a little bit complex due to that. But regarding those, Pakistan and Iran are one of the Taliban's biggest supporters on the international community, but has some concerns on the illegal immigrations. And also Pakistan is one of the countries who was brutally just said that Taliban support their anti-Pakistani militants like TTP inside Afghanistan, and they are just providing the space and the other equipments that the TTP or the other anti-Pakistani militants need to counterpart with the ISI or the other Pakistani intelligence forces inside in Afghanistan.
Now, we remember when the Taliban seized power, they did make some promises. They said that they would guarantee rights for women, for example. And we saw what happened. Very, very quickly, women and girls lost all of their rights. Some people, Shakib, are drawing comparisons with the new rulers in Syria. Do you agree with that? Do you see any similarities?
One of the biggest similarities is like both groups are the jihadi groups, especially the HTS and the Afghan Taliban are mostly the jihadi group. But the main difference is that the HTS is looking like more liberal jihadis, but the Taliban are more something like we can say it's been a little hardliners.
Shakib, great to talk to you. Thank you very much. All the way from Kabul, Shakib Nazari there. Thank you. Well, two developments in the strategic Horn of Africa region now. Turkey has been trying to broker a deal between Somalia and Ethiopia, which would allow Addis Ababa access to the Red Sea. But Ethiopia had been in separate talks with Somaliland. That's the breakaway region of Somalia, which wants to declare independence. Egypt has been sending its troops to Somalia to kind of hinder that plan by Ethiopia, because Ethiopia is at odds with Egypt over a huge dam it's building on the Nile, which Egypt says is a threat to its existence. Got all of that? Well, today Egypt's foreign minister met his Somali counterpart in Cairo. Take a listen.
The Red Sea belongs to the countries bordering the Red Sea, and the presence of any other party other than coastal countries of the Red Sea is unacceptable.
The Ankara Declaration also saved the entire region from a dangerous explosion that could have burned everyone's interests, as it was in no one's interest for another conflict to erupt in the Horn of Africa.
Well, we can go to Cairo now. We're joined by journalist Joost Scheffers. So, Joost, first of all, why is Egypt sending troops to Somalia?
Egypt is sending troops to Somalia for several reasons. The most important reason, as has been shown in this report already, Egypt wants to protect their own interest in this dam. Since Ethiopia has started to build this dam, there have been worries in Egypt, and even the numbers support that Egypt is getting less water through the Nile. And you should know that the Nile in Egypt is the main source of life here in Egypt. Like 89% of the population just lives in a small few percentage of the country, of the whole country, like surrounding the Nile. So if less water is flowing through the Nile, then yeah, it's literally a threat to life in Egypt. So that's Egypt's biggest worries in this regard. Second is that Egypt wants to expand its influence, whether it's in the Middle East region, but also towards Africa, and having more troops present in here to protect their interests regarding this Nile conflict. Strengthens Egypt's position within Africa as a wider region.
Meanwhile, Ethiopia is pressing ahead with this dam project. They don't show any signs of abandoning it. Is there anything Egypt can do at this point?
No, actually, there's very little Egypt can do. From the moment that Ethiopia started to build this dam, which is already like many years ago, I think about 10 years ago, Egypt has been trying to look for support from the US, within the EU, with other African countries to stop Ethiopia from building this dam, or at least to make regulations. There have been negotiations going on for a decade in order to facilitate a certain amount of control of water flowing through the Nile from Ethiopia through Sudan to Egypt. But yeah, so far an agreement hasn't been reached after all these years, because Ethiopia wants to see this as a huge factor for their economy. And they would say, we would need the water, we need this dam, we need it for electricity and other economical activities. Egypt has been very vocal in their worries, but so far no one has been actively listening to them or trying to solve this conflict, and then the African Union, that didn't work out yet.
Joost, thank you very much. Joost Scheffers in Cairo. Today is Christmas Eve, and up in the mixed city of Haifa in northern Israel, celebrations are already underway. Well, our Joe Brown is up there taking in the festive atmosphere. Oh, and he's beautifully dressed. He's got his Christmas jumper on. Joe, looking good. Any sign of Santa?
Thank you. Yes. I'm not sure if this comes out well on TV, but this is a new thing from my Christmas jumper. Hold on. 3, 2, 1. Do you see it? I hope it comes out well.
Amazing.
I'm not sure if it does because of the lights, but it does light up. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so here
you might want to change the batteries.
It is the festival. I'm trying my best. This is the first time I've worn it. I don't know if it will last in the washing machine, so it might also be the last. So I'm getting as much mileage out of it as possible. But here in Haifa, this is called the Festival of Festivals. It's an event that celebrates the three major religions here in Israel. There is Christmas, which will of course be tomorrow. There's Hanukkah, which is also starting tomorrow. And there's Ramadan, which is in February, but they've wanted to mix it all together. And here on the German colony in Haifa, it's kind of like a mini Christmas market. They do this every year, but for the first time, we got Santa here. Hello, Santa. Thanks, mate. Appreciate it. That was Santa. That was actually him, for the record. I hope I'm on the nice list. I'm Jewish. I'm not on the nice list. I mean, I might be. I don't know. But we're going to have a look around. Here is the festival festivities. There's the Hanukkah menorah there. There's the Christmas tree, and there's also something celebrating Ramadan. And if we look around, there's also further events going along. We've got a nice little crowd here who are waiting to try get on air. But we are going to film a little bit above them and all the way around.
Beautiful.
So right here, right now, surrounded by everyone here. People are People are loving it, and this is good because we haven't seen this in such a long time. When I was here for the last couple months, there hasn't been all these people. It's been quiet because of the rocket attacks. Haifa's been bombarded over the last couple months, but now people are finally coming out. They're finally celebrating, and there's festive cheer. Everybody here is happy. Everybody here is having a good time. There's a popcorn machine behind me, which is filling up my nose right now, and everybody is just enjoying themselves, what seems to be for the first time in 14 months.
Wow. Yes, they need it, don't they? Forget Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. It looks like Haifa is the place to be. Chris Madan-Makar. Is that what we're calling it, Joe?
You can call it that. I don't think they've officially called it that yet, but, you know, it's a Laura Sellier special.
It is. Joe Brown, looking wonderful. Enjoy making friends up there. Joe Brown. All right, well, Merry Christmas to you if you are celebrating. And Iraq's ever-shrinking Christian population is preparing for their Christmas celebration. The Christian population in Iraq has shrunk by 90% over the past 20 years, but they're still celebrating. More in this report.
A giant tree adorns Baghdad as Iraqis prepare for Christmas. Shops across the city, especially in the bustling Sharjah market, were crowded with people finishing their last-minute holiday shopping.
This tree is the largest tree in Iraq, with a height of around 30 meters and a diameter of 10 meters. It carries a message of peace and love, bringing together all the groups within Iraqi society.
Crowds scrambled for bells, ribbons and other Christmas ornaments, despite the country's economic woes and crises just across the border.
We pray and ask our God to have mercy on us with his infinite mercy and to support the poor and needy amid this crisis. Many people are unemployed and many are struggling immensely to put food on the table.
The Christian population in Iraq has plummeted over the years due to targeted violence by groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And since the 2003 Iraq War, the population has dropped from around 1.5 million to 150,000 Christians today. But despite the multitude of challenges facing the Iraqi Christian community and Iraq as a whole, Christians are undeterred from their celebrations.
We hope that security and peace will prevail among all Arabs, all countries, and the whole world in the coming year, God willing. May we get rid of all these wars that have affected many countries and move past this crisis. Hopefully, we will welcome the new year with joy and happiness.
Well, wherever you are in the world, Merry Christmas if you're celebrating from here where it all began, in the Holy Land. From me and the team, thanks for watching. Good night.
It started on October 7th, but for many, the horror may never end. With homes destroyed, families displaced, hostages missing, soldiers fallen, and a country traumatized. In the first year alone, more than 17,000 Israelis have been wounded, and hundreds of thousands have experienced psychological trauma and need support now. Thankfully, for 112 years, Hadassah hospitals have been on the ground healing. At our expanding Gandel Rehabilitation Center, we're providing critical physical therapy and life-changing mental health services.
Hadassah is a great place.
Today I'm really thankful.
Now, some are back home, living their lives, but many more still need our help. Help your family and friends heal at Hadassah hospitals. Give today.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
¡Policía! ¡Policía! ¡Policía!
She is the first Israeli hostage to pass away since being freed from terror captivity in Gaza. 78-year-old grandmother Hannah Katzir was abducted on the 7th of October and held hostage for 7 weeks at the hand of Hamas. She was laid to rest at her kibbutz today. Israel promises to start targeting Houthi leaders following the latest missile fire towards the country, vowing to do what it did to other terror leaders, including the likes of Ismail Haniyeh, Yahya Sinwar and Hassan Nasrallah. And in Europe, a Dutch court convicts 5 men for their part in the shocking violence against Israeli soccer fans in Amsterdam last month. The harshest sentence was 6 months in prison for public violence. This is the rundown on I-24 News. I'm Benita Levine. Thank you for joining us. A devastating day for Israel. One of the elderly Israeli hostages who was freed from terror captivity in Gaza in the first truce deal has today passed away. Hannah Katzir was 78. She had been struggling with medical complications after her 7 weeks in captivity in Gaza and had been hospitalized for heart issues she never had before the Hamas terror onslaught. She was abducted from her home in kibbutz Nir Oz on the 7th of October and was released days after the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror group had falsely claimed she had been killed in an IDF airstrike. Her 79-year-old husband, Rami, was murdered during the terror onslaught, and her son, Elad, was taken hostage and later murdered. His body was recovered in April. Her family saying today her heart could not withstand the terrible suffering since the 7th of October. For more, we go to our correspondent, Balir Sladin. He joins us from Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. What a heartbreaking day, Balir. Hannah Katzir laid to rest today. She was born to a family of Holocaust survivors and is survived by 3 children and 6 grandchildren. One can only imagine the horror and trauma she endured in the past 445 days. Tell us more.
Definitely, and before we talk about Hannah Katzir and what has been told about families of hostages at her funeral and also after her passing away today, just a quick update from the Prime Minister's office, very important. The Prime Minister's office saying that the negotiation team, which included senior officials from the Mossad, Shin Bet and the IDF, were returned to Israel from Qatar this evening after a significant week of conducting negotiations. The reason for the return of the negotiation team is that there will be an internal consultation in Israel regarding the continuation of negotiations for the return of the abductees, for the return of the hostages. And this is happening after yesterday Prime Minister Netanyahu at the Knesset says that progress has been made, but he cannot guarantee any timing for when or will ever be a deal with Hamas soon in the coming days or not. Now, going back to Hana Katira today at her funeral, one of the speakers there said that she can't believe that she's saying this, but she can. Of Israel did not return the 100 hostages for more than 445 days that are still in captivity in Gaza. And also Yizhar Lefches, the son of Oded Lefches, that is another elderly in Gaza that is still held up in the Gaza Strip, is saying that the condition of the or situation of the old people in Gaza is very concerning, and they should be returned as soon as possible because of the fact that they, of course, are might be in a medical condition that won't help them survive in the tunnels in Gaza and in the 445 days in Gaza while a war is waging there. Today, after all this time, the hostages are still kept in captivity, and the people here at the hostages square where the families of the hostages are hoping, of course, for a breakthrough in the talks in Doha. Specifically this time after a couple of weeks of, let's say, some sort of positive atmosphere surrounding this negotiation, because maybe Hamas, after all, after they have seen that Hezbollah is not going to help them, not anyone else, and after the killing of Yahya Sinwar, and maybe because of the military pressure, now will concede and agree to give at least a number of hostages.
Correspondent Balir Sladin, live from Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. Thank you for the update. And now for more reaction and insight. It's a pleasure to welcome to studio Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, former IDF international spokesperson and a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osseran. Gentlemen, thank you both so much. So, of course, condolences to the family of Hana Katsir, abducted from her home on the 7th of October, when one thinks that she came out, was freed in that first truce deal. One cannot imagine, Jonathan, what she endured. Only on being released did she find out her husband had been murdered on the 7th and her son had been killed, murdered in captivity. Your reaction, your thoughts?
Well, it reminds us, if anybody needed to be reminded, that they are all on borrowed time. Our brothers and sisters held by Hamas brutally and cruelly 445 days are on borrowed time, and I think it behooves us to do whatever possible feasible to make a deal and understand the limitations of what we have that is negotiable. At the end of the day, Israel has been trying to get our people back while getting rid of Hamas and having Gaza freed from Hamas. It doesn't appear as if that is going to happen, and as such, I think that this is another reminder for Israeli decision makers that we probably need to adjust our targets and adjust our goals and make whatever is possible now in order to have more Israeli hostages back home. I don't think that the way that the things are run now, the pace of operations and the actions that the IDF is taking on the ground will lead to the full breaking and collapse of Hamas. And as such, why not do it now and why wait?
Tell us more about the adjustments that you are alluding to. What are you thinking?
So, I mean, we would want to have a Gaza free of Hamas, a Hamas that is totally obliterated, and to get our hostages back. Those are the goals of the war. We've had many months to operate, and we are operating, but at the end of the day, I don't think that enough progress is being made on the ground and below ground in order to really get rid of Hamas. For that to happen, what Israel needs to do is to take the decision to actually start administering the Gaza Strip, to control it, and to get rid of Hamas and UNRWA. Without that happening, then Hamas is in place, and then we're in this perpetual situation of, well, we haven't achieved our goals yet, therefore we cannot agree to a ceasefire. I think that definitely the time has come, it actually came many months ago in my point of view, that we need to call balls and strikes and understand that this is the reality, and if we haven't chosen a different strategy, then this is where we are now, and we should make more efforts to make a deal and to approve it. And last thing, I'm hearing lots of less negative statements coming out from Arabic-speaking media, which I'm sure is Hamas, Egyptian and Qatari messaging. And I think we should pay attention to that and make a swift and clever move that will see more Israelis home.
To that exact point, Ariel, the reports, your sources, what you're hearing about certain countries and their assessment, Arab countries that you are alluding to, and what they are thinking in terms of the time being right now for a deal.
Yeah, we see ongoing talks both in Doha and in Cairo. Over the weekend, they were in Cairo. Now, for 8 days, there were ongoing discussions in the Qatari capital. But what we're hearing from Egypt is that up until recent weeks, Qatar kind of took a sidestep, a back seat in the negotiations. And according to the Egyptians, that helped push the talks forward. That allowed, or that encouraged Hamas to kind of agree on more concessions and to move forward in the negotiations. But ever since the Qataris returned to the driver's seat in the negotiations, they've witnessed a slowdown in the willingness on the part of Hamas to move forward in many of these sticking points. That explains why the Egyptian delegation of negotiators even themselves went to Doha to kind of keep an eye on the discussions. And another interesting point in these discussions in Qatar over the past week, for the first time, we're seeing also the involvement of a Turkish delegation following the chain of victories that Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the president of Turkey, feels that more emboldened, more engaging in the region. So now they're taking not a leading part in the negotiations, but they're definitely in the room with all the parties involved.
Fascinating developments indeed. And of course, a reminder when one remembers the story of Hana Katsir, Palestinian Islamic Jihad had claimed that she was killed in an Israeli airstrike, and then just days later, her name appeared on a list of hostages set to be freed. That was back more than a year ago. Just a reminder of the evil one is tackling when you talk about trying to reach some kind of a deal. The psychological manipulation continues. Now, the IDF has passed on communication recordings of surveillance soldiers killed or abducted on the 7th of October to their parents. This follows a year-long legal process. Many of the relatives are complaining that the recordings from the Nahal Oz base have not been released in full and that some of the female soldiers aren't heard in them at all. The recordings from Friday, the 6th of October, the day before the terror onslaught, and from the early morning of October 7th were sent to grieving families after a high court order. 15 surveillance soldiers were killed and 7 were taken hostage on the 7th of October. 1 was rescued and another was murdered in captivity. Her body has been recovered. The other 5 are still being held hostage in Gaza. Liri Albag, Karina Ariev, Agam Berger, Naama Levy and Daniela Gilboa. 445 days later. Defense Minister Yisrael Katz is now ordering the IDF to release the full video recordings. Lieutenant Colonel in the reserves, Jonathan Conricus, when you look at the footage of those young female soldiers, what they endured on the 7th, today we're still wondering and hoping and praying that they are alive and they will get to come back home. What do you make of this debacle around the recordings?
Very regrettable. I think that poor judgment and poor decisions by the IDF. I think that the whole process here with the families doesn't add any sense of cohesion and doesn't add trust in the institutions, in the IDF, in its decision making. The families have been asking for what I think is a very legitimate request to hear the last words of their loved daughters, and for unclear reasons that has been prevented. And once now the IDF has released those partial recordings, To do again a partial release only after being forced to do so by a court, and then to have a politician kind of weigh in and order the IDF to release it in full, I see that as a very regrettable decision-making process. I think it is so important for Israeli society to re-establish, to start rebuilding trust in our institutions. And trust is based on transparency, good decisions, the ability to face criticism. And sadly, this isn't a good example of any of those.
Trust based on transparency, indeed. Stay with us. We've got much more to discuss right now. An update out of northern Gaza, the latest on terrorist activity out of a hospital there. Israeli troops have wrapped up a limited operation against terrorist operatives and infrastructure in the vicinity of the Indonesian hospital in Jabalia. It says over the past month, terrorists carried out attacks against Israeli troops from the area of the hospital, including anti-tank missile attacks. Terrorists also planting explosive devices and booby traps in the vicinity surrounding the hospital compound. The IDF says several warnings were issued to the Gazan Health Ministry regarding terrorist activity being conducted inside the hospital. Now, sirens blared across central Israel overnight once again as the Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen shot yet another missile towards Israel for the third time in days. No injuries were reported this time as the IDF intercepted the missile before it entered Israeli airspace. The Houthis have effectively raised the intensity of missile attacks against Israel, prompting a stark warning from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Senior correspondent Bianca Zanini has more.
For the third time in less than a week, sirens sounded across central Israel as Yemen's Iran-backed Houthis fired another missile at Israel overnight. The IDF said the missile was intercepted before it entered Israeli airspace. As the attacks continue, Israel is working to get the Houthis internationally recognized as a terrorist organization and promising to strike back hard.
In recent days, we, Defense Minister Katz and I, have instructed the IDF to attack strategic targets of the Houthi militia in Yemen in a precise operation, and let me tell you, it is not the first and it will not be the last. We have destroyed significant terrorist assets that the Houthi militia has used against us.
A senior Houthi official posted on X that their attacks against Israel will not stop until the, quote, aggression against our people in Gaza stops. The Houthis are emerging as the last active and effective arm of Iran, causing damage and injuring Israelis in and around Tel Aviv in the last weeks. Israel and the US have been striking back against the Houthis in Yemen and are expected to continue.
Still in studio, Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran. And the Houthis are very active, Jonathan. Israel seeking international recognition of the Houthis as a terror organization. Will that make the difference? It's getting out of hand.
I think it's a step in the right direction, obviously. And I think that what the Houthis are doing is a clever strategy on their behalf, which is to maintain kind of a steady drip of fire towards Israel, to keep focus on what's happening and to keep Israel in a constant state of readiness and basically annoyed by the Houthis, hoping that Israel will allocate significant resources against them. And they are enjoying the fact that they are about 2,000 kilometers away. Of course, Israel has the ability to fly there and to deliver significant strikes. But if we're really honest and really assess the situation, meaningful impact on the Houthi military capabilities, in my mind, can happen in one of two ways. Either a massive, really massive bombing campaign on various targets, military, dual purpose, and other targets all across Houthi control areas, with what I presume will be a high civilian toll. I don't think that's in the cards now for Israel. Probably wouldn't be a wise strategic move, and it would have a limited effect. And the other way of getting order with the Houthis is boots on the ground. I don't think Israel has any appetite to do that either, which keeps us in this kind of limbo of situation where we'll have to continue to defend ourselves, once in a while show force, And I think that it really makes it more clear for anybody watching geostrategy in the Middle East that Israel probably needs to be focusing on where the weapons are coming from to Yemen and the people that are controlling the Houthis, and that's the Islamic Republic of Iran, and probably would be wiser, strategically speaking, to focus on Iran than on the diversion, the last standing Iranian proxy in the Middle East, which are the Houthis, and probably wiser to focus on the senders, being Iran.
That said, Ariel, many are concerned about the kinds of cruise missiles that are being launched out of Yemen by the Houthis and Israel's ability to defend itself, the timing of the sirens, and just a short while ago, news that a significant number of Arrow 3 interceptors are going to be added to Israel's stack, so to speak. Tell us more.
Look, Israel's facing an ongoing threat and it needs to maintain its stockpile of interceptor missiles. And so this is one of those steps to keep Israel's defenses active. And this is a very important step. But I also want to take you to what I'm hearing from sources in the Gulf who it connects to what we just discussed about the Western involvement. They're frustrated with the American policy in the Middle East in general, but specifically regarding the Houthis. They say that the Houthis are posing a threat to all countries in the region, not just Israel and not just the maritime activity in the Red Sea. But it was the Americans who urged the Saudi-led coalition back in 2018 to stop their attacks against the Houthis. And so it's up to the Americans to take the lead in changing the situation. What are they saying? They're saying that we are not willing to clean up their mess for them. They must show that they are serious about establishing a regional coalition to counter the Houthis. Now, this isn't to say that the Saudis aren't involved. They are in active and constant coordination with all actors under the CENTCOM, the U.S. Central Command apparatus. They're taking a more behind-the-scenes activity. But I will note that over the past 24 hours, we have seen very interesting developments with Saudi-backed forces in Yemen launching an offensive against the Houthis from the south, and Saudi forces are engaged in shelling on Houthi installments in the Sada province in northern Yemen. So what Jonathan talked about, the boots on the ground, it doesn't necessarily have to be Israeli or other Western elements. We are seeing that the internal situation in Yemen is bubbling against the Houthis. If you couple that with a bolstered regional coordination, U.S.-led coalition with Israel, this is what could help tip the scale in this current escalation.
Jonathan, your sense on the U.S. policy here and also how different it might look come January 20th.
Yeah, so we've heard President-elect Trump indicating clearly that he wants to end wars and not start new ones, which probably is difficult for any U.S. president in the Middle East, given the amount of anti-American sentiment and hatred and animosity that there is against the U.S., the Iranians and others. I think that we're in an interim period now, which is probably a good time for Israel to establish facts on the ground. I think that Israel has tremendous working ties with CENTCOM, and we see things eye to eye when it comes to strategic threats and how to deal with them. And maybe now there's a certain window of opportunity to elevate the offensive operations against the Houthis. But at the end of the day, even having said that, even with a significant Saudi presence on the ground for a temporary while and more bombing by the coalition and Israel, at the end of the day, to deal with the Houthis is a very broad endeavor. You have to go for their logistics, their supply of weapons, their supply of money, and you really have to be on the ground. If you don't do all of those things combined, then I don't think that anybody could really bring a substantial change and really defeat the Houthis. They are enjoying the fact that they're far away from anybody and that the Saudis, up until now, haven't really been able to generate the military capacities really to deal with them.
Very briefly, in this so-called window period before January 20th, does Israel target Iran directly?
I don't think so. I think that what we are going to see is a long shift in Israeli strategy. I think that what Israel is doing is putting a credible military threat on the table in order to influence decision-making in Iran and probably in Washington as well. But at the end of the day, I think that what Israel is going to do now for the coming years, not just the January 20th and a few months after that, but really the next years will be a campaign which is aimed at helping the Iranian people get rid of the Iranian regime. That, I think, will be the focus of Israel. And if Israel will be steadfast at it, that will really change the security situation in the Middle East. All of the other things that we are discussing are tactical, maximum operational details, but strategically, we need to be taking it to Iran.
We're going to discuss more about exactly that in a short while. Right now, stay with us. And an update out of the West Bank. 2 Israeli airstrikes in the Tulkarem area today amid ongoing clashes between Israeli forces and Palestinian terrorists. This coming after the IDF launched an anti-terror operation there overnight, arresting 18 suspects and confiscating several weapons. It confirmed killing at least 1 terrorist during face-to-face battles with troops, and another terror suspect was neutralized in Nablus. Meanwhile, Fatah has ordered a ban on Al Jazeera in the northern West Bank after negative coverage of the Palestinian Authority's ongoing operation in Jenin. This comes amidst a massive security operation launched earlier this month in that city against Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad and other groups. The PA is trying to reassert dominance in the northern West Bank city, and I24 News learnt on Monday that some 270 Palestinian security officers were detained for refusing to take part in that operation. Now, that media ban follows a similar move Israel imposed on the Qatari media giant earlier in the year over its insightful media coverage of the war in Gaza. Israel's Defense Minister Yisrael Katz has admitted publicly for the first time to the Israeli elimination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran in July. The political head of the terror group was targeted in the Iranian capital as he visited for the presidential election, a major humiliation, of course, for the Iranian hosts. Yisrael Katz saying on Monday evening during an event to honor his staff that Israel has defeated Hamas and Hezbollah and toppled Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria. And when it comes to the threat out of the Houthis, well, here's his message.
These days, when the Houthi terrorist organization is firing missiles at Israel, I want to convey a clear message to them at the beginning of my remarks. We have defeated Hamas. We have won over Hezbollah. We have blinded Iran's defense systems and damaged the production systems. We have toppled the Assad regime in Syria. We have dealt a severe blow to the axis of evil. And we will also deal a severe blow to the Houthi terrorist organization in Yemen, which remains the last to stand and fire at Israel. We will damage its strategic infrastructure, and we will eliminate its leaders, just as we did to Haniyeh, Sinwar, and Nasrallah in Tehran, Gaza, and Lebanon. We will do it in Hodeidah and Sana'a. Whoever will raise his hand to Israel, his hand will be severed. The IDF's long arm will harm him and will settle the score.
A clear message indeed, as we were discussing earlier on in the show. Now, a very quick break. When we get back, updates out of Europe. A Dutch court convicts 5 men for their part in the shocking violence against Israeli soccer fans in Amsterdam last month. The harshest sentence was 6 months in prison for public violence. Our coverage continues on The Rundown. Stay tuned. Back in a bit.
Started on October 7th, but for many, the horror may never end. With homes destroyed, families displaced, hostages missing, soldiers fallen, and a country traumatized. In the first year alone, more than 17,000 Israelis have been wounded, and hundreds of thousands have experienced psychological trauma and need support now. Thankfully, for 112 years, Hadassah hospitals have been on the ground healing. At our expanding Gandel Rehabilitation Center, we're providing critical physical therapy and life-changing mental health services.
Hadassah is a great place.
Today I'm really thankful.
Now, some are back home, living their lives, but many more still need our help. Help your family and friends heal at Hadassah hospitals. Give today.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
¡Policía! ¡Policía! ¡Policía!
Welcome back to The Rundown. To Europe now. A Dutch court has today convicted 5 men for their part in the shocking violence against Israeli soccer fans in Amsterdam last month. The district court finding them guilty of a range of crimes, from kicking fans of Maccabi Tel Aviv in the street to inciting violence in chat groups, including calls to hunt Jews. The heaviest sentence imposed was 6 months in prison for public violence against several people. Police saying they were investigating at least 45 people over the violence. Israeli officials had said 10 people were injured, while hundreds more huddled in their hotels for hours, fearing they could be attacked. Many said that Dutch security forces were nowhere to be found as the Israeli tourists were ambushed by gangs of masked attackers who shouted anti-Israel slogans while they beat and harassed them. So for more reaction, it's a pleasure to welcome Michal Kotler-Wunsch, Israeli Special Envoy for Combating Anti-Semitism. Michal, thank you as always for your time. The footage out of Amsterdam on that night, the targeting of Jewish soccer fans, was difficult to watch. Simple question, does the punishment fit the crime?
Well, we have to be very, very clear. In fact, the prosecutor argued that this has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. Instead, it has to do with, quote, the situation in Gaza. And so not only does the punishment not fit the crime, but the allegation that should have been substantiated, that is, of anti-Semitism having fueled what was called by its perpetrators a Jew hunt of cancerous Jews in a 2024 pogrom in the streets of Amsterdam, as part of what we have seen as a tsunami of anti-Semitism around the world, cannot, of course, be identified and combated if we do not name it for what it was. So before we even get to the punishment, before we even get to the light sort of 6 months at most, and we know that many of those will actually be turned and limited and shortened into up to 10 weeks and maybe even less, we understand that the message here is loud and clear, and that is that this strain of anti-Semitism, that is anti-Zionism, the denial of Israel's very right to exist, that has been mainstreamed and normalized, unleashing the genie from the bottle, Anti-Semitism, as mainstreamed and normalized in the streets of Amsterdam and around the world, has not actually been impacted by the decision of the court.
And of course, we heard a few hours back that the public prosecutor's office says they're studying the verdicts and the jail sentences handed down, and the attorneys aren't happy with the decision to treat one suspect as a minor, giving the 19-year-old community service instead of jail time. And the prison terms are also going to be discussed, so there could well be appeals. But more broadly speaking, what does this all mean for future sports matches involving Israeli teams, not only in Amsterdam, but across Europe? Tell us more, your thoughts, your concerns right now.
Well, this had nothing to do with sports. We understand that this was a premeditated and pre-planned attack of Israelis and all those that came to support an Israeli team in what was supposed to be a sports match. And we have to be very, very clear. What we saw was actually a manifestation of what I referred to before as the tsunami of anti-Semitism in the aftermath of the worst attack of Jews since the Holocaust on October the 7th of 2023, and a multi-front war that has been raging since, openly intent to annihilate the state of Israel and to murder Jews around the world. If we do not treat it as such, utilizing the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, then in Amsterdam too, we are not identifying this strain of what is an ever-mutating hate that has, in fact, been unleashed in the past 14 months, that is raging around the world. And as I have said multiple times, as anti-Semitism is the most reliable sign of the major threat to humanity and to freedom and to the dignity of difference, what we have here is actually the court endorsement of this undermining of our international rules-based order, including in Amsterdam, not limited to, and including in sports, which is mandated to be this fair play of equal standards applied to everyone, but in fact has been, sort of proven as one more case in this tsunami of anti-Semitism, in which the policies that need to be implemented in order for there to be a clear and unequivocal message that anti-Semitism in all of its strains, as defined by IHRA, is unacceptable, has actually been permitted by a court of law.
We keep watching the developments there. Always appreciate your reaction and your insights. Thank you so much, Michal Kotler-Wunsch. Thank you for being with us on The Rundown.
Thank you, Benita, for having me on.
Now, turning to the latest out of the United Nations, the UN Special Rapporteur, Francesca Albanese, has taken to social media to share her thoughts about the documentary called Israelism, a controversial look at the way two young American Jews join a movement of young American Jewish groups wanting to redefine Judaism's relationship with Israel. Now, as outlined in her post, Albanese says it shows that many Jewish people worldwide, unconditionally in love with Israel, live a lie premised upon the invisibilization of or erasure of the Palestinians. Israel's founding ideology and lie is now leading to a genocide. What a disgraceful epilogue. That is her quote. So, for more, we cross live to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. He joins us from Washington. And Mike, you, of course, have been covering the UN and some of its vile rhetoric. This post by Francesca Albanese about the documentary Israelism takes it to a new level, though. It's beyond abhorrent and speaks volumes, coming from a person, of course, in her position. Take us through the latest.
Francesca Albanese, the UN's unofficial chief resident anti-Semite, comically so at times. There's a little bit of a backstory to this particular tweet. She actually posted a similar tweet yesterday and then deleted it. Well, why did she delete that one? Well, instead of linking to this film that she raved about that follows two American Jewish outliers, and she extrapolates that this represents many Jews worldwide, but in any case, she didn't link to that film, that documentary. Instead, she linked to a performance of Shin Yun, the anti-Chinese Communist Party entertainment and dance troupe. It has nothing to do with anything at all. I don't even know where she got that link from, but she wound up deleting it, retweeted it, but then added that Israel's founding ideology is a lie. So I guess that makes up for the mislink. In any case, Francesca Albanese has been denounced by multiple governments, the U.S., the German, and even the French, for her anti-Semitism, outrageous at times, the French have claimed. So this just another example of this UN quote-unquote independent expert run amok here, just rampant anti-Semitism, telling Jews worldwide that they are in fact living a lie.
Staggering indeed. Meanwhile, Mike, US Ambassador Jack Lew slamming inaccurate reports about aid distribution in Gaza, pointing out that the latest information shared by FuseNet on Gaza is in fact outdated. It seems highly irresponsible. Talk us through what happened and the reaction.
This is quite stark. I'll give you a little bit of background here. Jake Lew, the American ambassador to Israel. Now, FuseNet is the Famine Early Warning System network, and it does exactly what it says it does. It tries to detect famine as it's happening in order for international humanitarian groups and other nations and organizations to react to it and try to cut it off at the pass. Well, FuseNet is funded by USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development. That is its far and away its primary funder. So it is a U.S. government-funded organization. And here is Jack Lew, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, saying that this organization is using junk data, that it's simply wrong and putting out irresponsible information. It's a U.S. ambassador going against his own, essentially his own State Department. This is a State Department organization, USAID. Really, really bizarre how this is playing out here. Now, FuseNet, along with another famine warning group, the IPC, has been consistently criticized by Israel and other critics throughout this war for promoting information that is misinformed, that is behind the times, that is inaccurate, that is incomplete. Remember, these organizations, FuseNet and the IPC, have warned that famine was either happening or imminent time and time again, only to go back months later after the headlines had died away, revise that data, and then put out more warnings of imminent or current famine. So they've been wrong time and time again. What Jack Lew is saying in this particular report is that FuseNet is using a population size in northern Gaza that isn't relevant anymore. At one point, the population there was in the tens of thousands, 60, 70,000 people. The UN has even recognized at this point that due to multiple evacuations, that particular area of northern Gaza, population there is 10, 15,000 at most. Yet, groups like FuseNet are still using high population counts, distorting the amount of food that's actually going in to feed the population.
Distorting information like that, so dangerous, as we have witnessed firsthand over the period of this war. Thank you so much. As always, senior US correspondent Mike Wagenheim, live from Washington. And still in studio, Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran. And Jonathan, the UN Special Rapporteur, Francesca Albanese, as we were just discussing with Mike, getting away with staggering comments in the public domain. How does this happen? How is this allowed? Your thoughts?
I think she is a complete and utter disgrace for the UN. She is a sham. She is a blatant and raging anti-Semite, and she peddles in, you call it a documentary here, it's an Al Jazeera hit piece. This is an Al Jazeera created movie that is intended to undermine the support of Jewish Americans for Israel. It's another, high income or high value production of Al Jazeera aimed at undermining that link, understanding how important the link is between Jews around the world and the State of Israel. And, it's been out for at least 2 months. I don't know what triggered her to tweet about it and why she discovered it now. It's not even new. It's an old propaganda piece done by Al Jazeera, the same Al Jazeera that even the Palestinians are kicking out because they are inciting terror, promoting violence and destabilizing Palestinian-controlled areas. That is how bad Al Jazeera is. I think, this person, she should be fired from her position. She's a disgrace to the UN. She does nothing but undermine what is left of any semblance of trust that people around the world can have in this important institution, the UN. And having people like her in a position, and she peddles in conspiracy theories, that is just incredibly unhelpful, a disgrace, and it should end as soon as possible.
A disgrace. Indeed, we wait to see more reaction following that appalling tweet. Stay with us, much more to discuss, because another developing and crucial story in this region. After more than 6 years, Syrian medics have finally come forward to admit they were coerced by Bashar al-Assad's regime to give false testimonies to the international community regarding the 2018 chemical attack in Douma. Our Elfie Moore has the details in this report. Take a look.
2 Syrian doctors and a nurse have now come forward to say that Bashar al-Assad's government coerced them into providing false testimony to international investigators after a deadly 2018 chlorine attack on a rebel-held town.
Our first stop was Moscow, followed by The Hague. We were scheduled to meet with the investigation committees behind closed doors, but we were surprised to find the media present and that we were expected to hold a live press conference.
The 3 who treated the wounded at a field hospital in the rebel-held town of Douma, near Damascus, after the April 7, 2018 attack, said they were summoned to the National Security Headquarters.
We were doctors with the revolution, serving in a field hospital and treating the wounded for a long time, but we were turned into false witnesses. This was the only harm that resulted from our actions. But on the other hand, we were able to protect the lives of thousands of people in the city of Douma.
The attack on the outskirts of Damascus was part of a major military offensive that returned the area to the control of forces under Assad after a prolonged Russian-backed siege against the rebel stronghold. The Syrian Foreign Ministry denied the allegations then and said that the report lacked any evidence.
We went to the military security branch to meet with an officer who told us that we must wrap up this matter and deny everything so that the city of Douma can turn the page without any raids or arrests.
Now, with the fall of Assad's regime, the head of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons said on December 12th he would ask Syria's new leaders to grant investigators access to the country to continue work identifying perpetrators of attacks that killed and injured thousands during the civil war.
Meanwhile, 2 weeks after the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime, celebrations across Syria are turning into protests as uncertainty looms over the country's future. Women, Kurds and Christians are rallying against the new Islamist rulers, demanding equal rights and protection for their communities. Our Yulia Pobagailova has details in this report.
In Kamishli, on the border with Turkey, thousands of women took to the streets, rallying for their rights under Syria's new Islamist-led government. They waved the green flags of the Women's Protection Units, a symbol of resistance and gender equality during years of Kurdish-led autonomy in the north.
We are demanding women's rights from the new state. Women must not be excluded from the system.
There is a widespread concern among Syrians that the new administration, led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, will gravitate towards hardline Islamist rule, marginalizing minorities and women from public life. Also, in Damascus, Christians are voicing their concerns. Protests erupted after the burning of a Christmas tree in Sukailabia, a Christian-majority town. HTS blamed foreign fighters from the Islamist group Ansar al-Tawhid.
This act was committed by people who are not Syrian, and they will be punished beyond your expectations. The Christmas tree will be fully restored tonight.
De facto ruler Ahmed al-Shara is a former affiliate of al-Qaeda, which sees Christians as infidels. But he has told Christians and other groups that they will be safe in Syria. But many Christians remain skeptical.
We are monitoring to see if these factions ruling Syria are serious about creating a civil society where all citizens, including Christians, can live freely.
The road ahead for Syria remains uncertain, as its diverse communities struggle to define their place in a post-Assad era. They vow to keep fighting for their rights in what they hope will become a truly inclusive and democratic Syria.
And I'm coming straight to our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran. A time of uncertainty, transition in Syria, rebel groups. It's not quite clear what the ideologies will mean, and certainly minority groups are speaking out straight away. What are your sources telling you? Tell us more.
Look, we need to talk about first the women's protest. The flag that they were waving was the YPJ. That's a Kurdish organization that is designated as a terror group by the Turkish government, and Kurds are being targeted in northern Gaza by Turkish forces themselves and also Turkish-backed forces. The latest advance is in the city of Manbij, and there was a car bomb explosion, 2 killed, 4 injured. So this is something that we need to look after. But most of these protests, besides that one that I just described, are less against the new de facto leadership, but more a call, an urge for them to maintain their rights in this new constitution that is being drawn up. All Syrians inside the country and also in exile or who have left are waiting to see what this constitution will bring. Will it indeed ensure their rights? Now, the latest development from inside Syria is that there was an announcement by the de facto leadership of all, if not most armed factions agreeing to consolidate under the new defense ministry, the new government, the new defense ministry. But this, to my understanding, does not include the Kurds, which, as I mentioned, are still engaged in combat against Islamist forces.
Mohammed al-Jalani, it's not clear what he's planning. Many questions remain. Israel is concerned. The region is concerned. He is trying to paint himself as some kind of a moderate. Is this a pivotal moment for Israel? What are you seeing? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, what I'm hearing from the IDF and what I'm seeing is a jihadist in suit that has definitely implemented the lessons of the failures of previous jihadis in Syria and in Iraq, ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And he is, I think, checking all the boxes on the way in terms of his transformation from militant leader to a guy in a suit with well-done hair and even a tie. And I think he's also signaling, communications-wise, the correct messages to the West in order to appease, in order to show that we are not going to do what ISIS did in 2014 and in Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor, and that this is different and we're not going to go on rampage killing sprees of minorities. And he understands, I think, how sensitive the topic is. However, the burden of proof is on HTS. I look at them as hardcore, thoroughbred jihadists, nothing less. And I think that we should be extremely careful not to be confused by the smokescreens and the new trappings, but really to look and understand that we are dealing with people who were born and raised and operated their entire lives under the banner of extremist jihadi Islam. And I think it would be clever for Israel to be very, very vigilant and, of course, seek opportunities and exploit them, but be very, very careful.
Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, with that warning, we thank you very much, as always, for being here in studio. And Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran, appreciate the updates and the insights. Thank you. Now, it's Christmas Eve, the height of the Christian festive season, but during wartime, things are obviously different in Nazareth, as correspondent Wissam Kaba from our sister Arabic channel discovered firsthand. Take a look.
For the second year in a row, a noticeable absence of the usual Christmas cheer in the city of Nazareth to celebrate the arrival of the Christmas season and the glorious Christmas holidays. This due to the repercussions of the ongoing war in our region, which has cast and continues to cast its thick and heavy black shadows on the atmosphere of the city as well.
We are waiting for this time of year because it is what distinguishes Nazareth. And unfortunately, this is what happened. This is the second year in a row that we have been open in the restaurant. The first year we were present. As much as it was nice, people did not know how to enter it. The street is always full. The lighting, it was something really fantastic. But for 2 years, we have been feeling this thing from the side of the city, of course, and the things that are there. This year, it wants to decorate it a little here and a little there. But we really do not feel the joy that should be present in Nazareth.
The markets are devoid of the decorations and Christmas lights that used to illuminate Nazareth, its neighborhoods and its roads. They have disappeared from the scene, and even the Christmas tree that used to stand proudly in the central square was not erected, but was merely placed inside the church so that in its absence the modest celebrations would prevail.
These 2 years have been very difficult for the area and for the interests around the area. They were not very good. The situation is difficult, and you know the economic situation in our country isn't easy. Many people are sitting without work, and many people have been harmed by the war. So the economic situation is very uneasy, And as you can see, the area was once crowded with tourists and a nice atmosphere that brought together all sects, and we celebrated with each other. It was very nice. We hope that next year will be better, because this year, a person can't hope for anything better.
The atmosphere, once full of life and joy, has turned into silence, gloom and sadness, which weighed heavily on the residents and left a deep impact on their souls. On such days of every year, Nazareth, the city of the Annunciation, is at the peak of the Christmas Eve celebrations. This is the second winter in a row in which a heavy silence prevails, reflecting sadness and apprehension about what the future may hold.
Unfortunately, this is the second year in a row that we are living in difficult conditions for all people and the whole world. So we hope that the new year will be a year of goodness, love and peace for the whole world, and that the joy of happiness will return to the world for children and all people.
Instead of overwhelming joy, Nazareth lives in a state of fear and anticipation, like many Arab towns and villages, waiting for hope to restore joy to its neighborhoods, streets and alleys, to appear as a city of the Annunciation as it has been since time immemorial.
So for more, we now go live to our Joe Brown. He's in Haifa in northern Israel. And Joe, it's Christmas Eve, also about to be the start of the Jewish festival of Hanukkah, but during a war, obviously not as festive, but then looking at your outfit, it seems there is some festive cheer where you are. What is happening? What can you tell us?
I'm not sure if you can hear that. That's not Santa's sleigh. That is a man on a motorbike going through the Christmas market. This is the Festival of Festivals. It was the night before Christmas, and it's also the night before Hanukkah. And the Haifa Council has merged all of those festivals together, as well as Ramadan, which is in February, but they want to create it together inclusively and to create the Festival of Festivals. This has been an annual tradition that's been going on in Haifa since 1993. Last year, due to the war, there was a break from it. Bear in mind, last year in Hanukkah was in late November, early December. This was very close after October the 7th. And this is the first year back. And although, as was mentioned in the report before me, that it's a bit dead in Nazareth right now, Haifa is the complete opposite. I'm going to step out of frame so you can see the beautiful Christmas tree, menorah, and as well as something dedicated to Ramadan. There are thousands of people lining these streets. There's festive cheer all around, and there's a lot of different stores. This is one that is usually a candy store. This is called Colony Bazaar. This is the German colony in Haifa, by the way. But because of Christmas, it's been repurposed as a Christmas shop. So if you come over, have a look. We've got some reindeers flanking me either side. And as we go in, all of these are actually for sale. There's a lot of price tags on these, a lot of these Christmas trees. There's even just over here, there is a model of the Nativity, Jesus, Mary,
Right.
Joseph. And I think you can get Joseph for 400 shekels, which is a great deal, around about $100. So if anyone's got a little bit of money spare, then Haifa is your place.
Joe Brown and the reindeers live from Haifa in northern Israel. Thank you, Joe. And that is a wrap with this edition of The Rundown. Here's to a meaningful Christmas or Hanukkah for those observing. Thank you.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
En nuestro próximo programa Luces sin Fronteras, una especial colaboración del Departamento de Emprendimientos Sionistas y I-24 News, haremos brillar la luz de Hanukkah entre Israel y el mundo hispano, resaltando la resiliencia del pueblo judío. Nos conectaremos con las comunidades judías latinoamericanas y mucho más. Un programa que brillará desde Israel al mundo. News 24, el magazine de análisis y noticias en español de I-24 News.
Hello and welcome to Jewish World Weekly on I-24 News. I'm Emily Francis. Each week, we'll focus on stories, issues, and personalities of Jewish interest here in Israel and throughout the diaspora. And we start with our top 5 items in the Jewish world, presented by Nicole Zedek. Nicole.
Thanks, Emily. Here are the top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. Police are investigating reports of gunshots fired at a Toronto Jewish girls' school for the 3rd time this year. Beis Chaya was also shot at in May and October. Elsewhere in Canada, a synagogue in Montreal was attacked with a firebomb last week for the 2nd time in a year, all just the latest in a series of anti-Semitic attacks in Canada. In one of his final acts as president, Joe Biden has commuted the sentence of 37 out of the 40 people on death row. Of the 3 that weren't, one of them was Robert Bowers, who killed 11 Jews at the Tree of Life Synagogue in 2018. Biden said he didn't want to commute the sentences of those who committed acts of terror or hate-motivated mass murders. 160 children and 40 women were rescued in Guatemala from the fringe fundamentalist Jewish sect Lev Tahor. Police raided the Lev Tahor premises following allegations of child abuse, rape, and human trafficking. Suspected bones of one child were also found at the site. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer nominated former MP Luciana Berger for a life peerage, meaning she'll sit in the UK's House of Lords. Berger was a vocal opponent of former Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn and quit the party in 2019 due to anti-Semitism within Labour. Mike Katz, chair of the Jewish Labour movement, has also received a life peerage. And former boxing champion Floyd Mayweather donated $1 million to United Hatzalah, the Israeli volunteer-led emergency services. In a United Hatzalah gala in Miami, Mayweather gave an impassioned speech saying United Hatzalah volunteers are, like him, fighters. Last year, he donated 100 bulletproof vests and helmets to protect United Hutzlah's volunteers during the outbreak of the war with Hamas. Now, those are the top 5 stories in the Jewish world this week. Back to you, Emily.
As the U.S. Congress comes to a close for 2024, an event was held last week at the U.S. Capitol to mark the triumphs and struggles in the U.S.-Israel relationship. The event also highlighted the renewed attention in the effort in Congress to approve a commemorative coin of late Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir. Here's more from I-24 News senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim, who says the bipartisan event was largely upbeat, but some members did let their frustrations out.
Both Democratic and Republican Congress members attending the event last week here in the Capitol were eager to tout the bipartisan nature of the initiatives that made it through this last Congress regarding the U.S.-Israel relationship in terms of development of the Abraham Accords, missile and defense technology, trade, tourism, you name it. But there's no doubt there's also been tensions between the Democratic Party and the Israeli government since the outset of the Israel-Hamas war and through the American election season. We asked members of both sides of the aisle whether they felt bipartisan support, true bipartisan support, was slipping away.
Further than slipping away, they've led factions against Israel. And they tried to do it, kind of, in my opinion, subversively. But they need to be held accountable on this, because when they didn't show up, when Benjamin Netanyahu came to our chambers, that is a total abomination that should have never happened. And I was embarrassed. But you noticed a large portion of the Democrats did not show up. I think most of all the Republicans did. But it's a new day. It's time to be optimistic.
People have to understand that the vast majority of the Democratic Party stands with Israel. We understand that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East and is an ironclad partner and friend to the United States of America. I have no doubt that the pro-Israel vast majority of our party will rise for the next presidential election.
Last week's event was also dedicated to advancing an initiative to mint a congressionally approved commemorative coin in honor of former Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir, who grew up here in America. Now, to do that, you need 2/3 of the House and the Senate to approve. It's a tall order. The event being led on the Democratic side by Debbie Wasserman Schultz, on the Republican side by Congressmember Anthony Garbarino. Wasserman Schultz told us she's optimistic that Congress can get it done in the next session.
The entire approach to a commemorative gold coin bill is a bipartisan one. So, I mean, Congressman Garbarino and I worked together on the Golda Meir Commemorative Coin Act, and we got very close to the 290 co-sponsors that you needed to bring it to the floor. There was not as much energy behind the effort in the Senate, so we're just going to push the reset button and try again.
The fact that it isn't getting done is a certain Democratic leadership has told everyone, do not vote on this, just like we don't want you to vote on the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act until the elections are over. Well, now the elections are over and we're still hitting the same challenges. So we have some disgruntled leaders on the Democratic side who are telling their people not to sign on to this. And I'm very troubled by it because, again, it's partisan politics, but I believe a lot of that's going to evaporate in the next few months.
The new Congress is set to be sworn in on January 3rd, with Republicans holding a slim majority in both the House and the Senate. Reporting here from the Capitol, Mike Wagenheim, I-24 News.
The Jewish Institute for Television and Cinema and USC's Norman Lear Center have released a new study about Jewish representation, or lack thereof, in Hollywood. It found that 30% of Jewish characters were portrayed as wealthy, 50% with, quote, elite jobs, and half of Jewish parents were considered overbearing, and just under half of male characters had 2 or more characteristics associated with the Nebush stereotype. With all the focus on diversity on screen, Jews are continuing to be sidelined. We are now joined live from New York City by Alison Josephs of the Jewish Institute for Television and Cinema. Thank you very much for being here. And let's start by telling us more about the shocking results of this study.
Yeah, so I think that there is this misconception that because Jews, quote unquote, run Hollywood, that our representation is fine. And so I think we need to clarify that misconception, which I would actually call a trope. 100 years ago, several Jews founded Hollywood because they were escaping persecution. They were shut out of many fields, not so different from what we're seeing today, to be honest. And they built this empire of their own, as historian Neil Gabler put it. But a lot of what they built into the Jewish characters that they put on the screen was that sense of shame and, self-hatred that they got. And what that looked like was self-erasure, assimilation, caricatures, tropes. And to be fair, much of Hollywood was doing this to many minority groups for most of the time. This study focused on Jews in general, and then we had a smaller subset on Orthodox Jews. We would love to also study Israeli characters in a future study. It's our hypothesis that the Israeli character that used to be the helpful Krav Maga person or the ex-Mossad agent that would help fight the bad guys, there's now what we're seeing anecdotally is an increased viciousness and violence in Israeli characters and kind of putting the blood libel of Jews onto the Israeli characters themselves. And so we'd like to study how those characters used to be and how they're being portrayed now. But if you kind of take a step back and you think about the vilification of Orthodox Jews, and that was actually the most vilified group of the bunch, with, about half of Orthodox mentions being negative or judgmental, around a third of speaking Orthodox Jews being ex-Orthodox, a high frequency of dissatisfaction in their lives. If you think about what makes us uniquely Jewish, it's our heritage and it's our land. And if you think about Jews that are the most connected to Jewish heritage and the most connected to Jewish land, it's not surprising that that would be the ways that we would be the most attacked on screen. And so we need to be aware that these issues exist, and we need to demand the same protections every other group gets. And that's exactly the work that JITC Hollywood Bureau is doing.
Well, and it's a lot of work. I mean, we're seeing also, the silence of so many, Jewish celebrities that haven't spoken up. Of course, we know, many who have, Michael Rappaport, Deborah Messing, for example. But also the truth is so many of the producers, directors as well are Jews, which is seemingly, carrying on the whole idea of a history of assimilating because of what happened even in the time of Louis B. Mayer and whatnot. So what can be done also within the entertainment industry to make a difference and change that?
So one of the things, besides getting the consultants in the room and sort of calling out what the problems are, we would like to build writers' labs in the future where we take Jewish writers and we teach them Torah, we teach them Jewish history, we have them have meaningful Shabbat and holiday experiences, so Jewish pride and Jewish knowledge can be filled within, and that will affect the types of storytelling that we do. It's not surprising that after thousands of years of being exiled and persecuted and pogromed, that we would be filled with some, shame. And while the founders of Hollywood ran from their Jewish identity in order to try to escape anti-Semitism, the message that we're trying to give over with JITC Hollywood Bureau is lean in harder, lean in prouder, know who you are. Like, take Michael Rappaport. He's been rapping to fill in, since probably January of last year, doing this very publicly. Let's stop apologizing and being ashamed for our unique traditions. Let's find the meaning and beauty in them. We have to realize now, when the world hates us so much, we can only respond with a greater amount of self-love. So we want to try to build a new crop of Jewish creatives that have that kind of love, put those expressions on the screen, and inspire Jews all around the world.
Wow, beautifully said. Thank you very much, Alison Josephs of the Jewish Institute for Television and Cinema. Thank you again.
Thanks for having me on.
Shylock Shylock is one of the most infamous Jewish figures in literature, even nearly 500 years later. The villainous moneylender came to personify the long-lasting tropes against Jews. Well, now, this week, a highly accomplished British Jewish actress, Tracy Ann Oberman, is set to take the stage in London's West End, playing Shylock. And we're so pleased to go to London, where we are joined by Tracy Ann Oberman. Hello, Anna. Thank you for being here. Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah. Shalom. I hope you're all well. Yeah, literally about to run down on the stage, but it was so nice to be able to talk to you about this.
Yes.
I mean, it's traditionally a male role, so
of course
this is the first female Shylock to hit
I mean, that's
the
quite
stage.
historic. I mean, this is a historic situation for you, but we know that, you know, playing many acting roles, you are known for that, but it seems like the part that's closest to your heart is something that doesn't involve acting. It's fighting anti-Semitism and, you know, being very public about it when a lot of Jewish celebrities are remaining silent.
Well, I think you know, being Jewish is a huge part of my identity, and I didn't realize quite how much it was until the anti-Semitism was going left unchecked, particularly amongst the progressive left in England. You know, I looked around for the grown-ups to come in the Labour Party, for example, and nobody did. And I just felt, as somebody who comes from a Holocaust background and a pogrom background, I know when good people stay silent, the end game is. And, you know, I think this play, Merchant of Venice 1936, is merging my activism, my need for people to understand what anti-Semitism is, and my skill as an actor and a producer and as a writer together to create a really potent piece of theatre that has done a lot of good in explaining.
For sure. I mean, and to, you know, play this role, which, you know, people think of Shylock, they think of Al Pacino, but now they're going to think of you. And I think that that obviously also says a lot. And I understand because of your background, you are drawing on your own experience in your own personal family and taking on this role. Tell us more.
Yes. Well, I always wanted to you know, there was a lot of talk in this country about not doing this play anymore because it's a problematic play. And it was around the same time they were throwing statues into the river. I say just because history is unpleasant, you shouldn't get rid of it and erase it. You need to reclaim it. So I wanted to use my great-grandmother, my Bubba Annie, who came over from the shtetls and the pogroms of Belarus. She grew up in the East End of London. She was a strong, tough Jewish matriarch. We all know what those are like. You know, huge poverty over here. Big part of the labour movement. And then she came face to face with Oswald Mosley and the British Union of Fascists in 1936, when he marched on the Jewish entity, fully protected by the Metropolitan Police, to show the Jews that they weren't welcome. And on that day, my Bubba always told me that the Irish working class neighbours, the English working class neighbours, the small Afro-Caribbean community, all these ordinary heroes from all over the country said, if you come for the Jews, you come for us all. And they stood together and they pushed Mosley and his fascists back. So that's what I wanted to infuse in this play. Also to remind them that way before the State of Israel was even existed, anti-Semitism and the sort of tropes and the stereotypes that we're seeing now and the placards were going very strong even then. And so people must be very careful when they criticize Israel, that they actually criticize Israel and they don't bleed into anti-Semitic tropes that have been knocking around since the Middle Ages in Britain.
Well, and now with social media and the age we're in, it's just something that has grown like an uncontrollable fire. But let's not forget, even when the Shakespearean Elizabethan England, when these plays were being performed, they didn't even allow women, like they had boys and young men playing female characters.
Well,
so what's that about?
Well, to be honest, but forget the women, there were no, Shakespeare wrote this play where there were no Jews living in England, 200 years after every Jew had been kicked out of England very violently, stripped of everything and kicked out. They were still so deeply anti-Semitic that you have plays like The Jew of Malta and The Merchant of Venice being written, where an evil Jew trying to control everything and take blood and all those medieval tropes was still coming to the surface in these hugely successful plays. And, you know, this was Hitler's favourite play. He loved it. There's no complaints about that. And yet I think somehow in the way that I've done it, and why I think it's coming back into the West End twice, it's been going on a national tour, it's been a huge, huge success. I think it just speaks to people because I think they can see exactly what it is. It's taught very badly and people need to see it. And having a woman at the front shows just quite how misogyny and racism is tied together. And it makes it for a very potent bit of theatre.
Yeah. So what, I mean, given that you have such a vast repertoire of experience, what is it like? I mean, this is a, you know, a figure that even if you don't study Shakespeare, you've heard of Shylock.
Well, that's the thing. Shylock and Fagin, the two British Jewish archetypes, you know, these are the archetypal characters in literature. And Shylock, the idea of a Jew saying, my money, my daughter, my ducats, where money is the most important thing to him. It's never taught, it's never explained what that's all about. So taking on this character and really making it my own and turning it into a female matriarch who's been spat on in the streets, who's treated like dirt, who's treated like an immigrant dog, and had this one daughter that she wants to give a better life to, but not move too far away. And then that daughter gets snatched away. And to have these fascist aristocrats really try and destroy her, it's a really interesting piece of theatre. And you know what? We're living in such interesting times. You know, I'm not saying it's like the 1930s, but there is a lot of similarity, lots of, you know, extreme on the right and on the left. And as ever, Jews get squeezed in the middle.
Tracy Ann Oberman, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to meet you, even though remotely. But I'll see you on the West End, I hope soon.
Bye.
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 As each year passes, more survivors of the Holocaust are now passing away, limiting the number of first-hand experiences of the atrocities inflicted on the Jewish people in Europe in the first half of the 20th century. Most of the remaining survivors of concentration camps were young when they had to deal with these horrors, and this includes Evelyn Ashkolovitz, who survived 3 concentration camps before the age of 7. I-24 News correspondent Joe Brown has her story.
Someone who is 9, 10, 12 years old remembers. But for me, it's all flashes. And as nobody talked about it, I didn't talk about it either.
Evelyn Ashkolovitz was born in Amsterdam in 1938 to German parents who fled their homeland after the rise in Nazism. However, the Nazis conquered the Netherlands in 1940, and after 3 years of hiding, a neighbour gave them up to the authorities, and she, along with her parents, were sent to Vught and Westerbork camps in the Netherlands before being sent back to Germany and to the infamous Bergen-Belsen concentration camp.
When I was little, between the ages of 4 and 6, when things were too complicated, too hard, I had the ability to put myself in a bubble and not be there anymore. In the first camp, after I'd had all the illnesses, after I'd really nearly died, because Vught was a camp where children died of hunger, misery, and disease, I stopped being there. I was in a bubble of misery.
After 2.5 years of moving around camps and suffering from diseases such as measles and chickenpox, which the doctors thought would kill her, Evelyn and her parents were liberated by the Red Cross. But because of her young age, she doesn't remember a lot of what happened during those years, and it was often considered a taboo subject, both at home and among her peers. However, in 2012, almost 70 years after her liberation, she saw a familiar name on a Nazi document collected by the Red Cross, at which point the horrors that she was a part of had sunk in.
There was my name, Evelyn Sulzbach, not the daughter of, my name on individual cards, Vught, Westerbork, Bergen-Belsen, on lists and individual cards. And suddenly, it became reality when I saw my name printed on them. It wasn't just that my parents' daughter had been in the camps. I'd been there. And so it became. It wasn't 2012. It became a reality, that it was true.
After this, and with the rise in anti-Semitic attacks in Western Europe, Evelyn decided to make her story known. Alongside her son, the French journalist Claude Ashkolovitz, she wrote a book detailing her horrors in 2023. And to this day, she is still visiting schools and speaking at public events to tell her story and keep the memories of those awful years alive.
I decided in 2015 that as part of the very, very last generation, that I had to tell. And so now I tell the story. I go around schools in France and I only talk about the role of the Netherlands, which is a terrible role. because 75% of the Jews in the Netherlands didn't come back. It's the mirror of France, and I tell the story. They listen to me. I receive messages afterward, so I tell myself that somewhere, I hope I leave a trace, that it may have existed, and that it did exist.
Just heard a song called Toramente by Yosef Daniel, a singer-musician here in Israel. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, thank you.
So you've had quite a journey from Mexico to Texas to Israel to now a proud Jewish man singing songs of hope.
Definitely. You know, it's always been part of me. Music has always been part of, you know, my makeup. My grandfather was a musician. I had uncles that were musicians, singers, and I actually didn't grow up Jewish. I grew up as a Christian and, you know, evangelical Christian in America, in Texas, and, you know, always part of music. And so, you know, we found our Jewish roots, converted to Judaism, and here we are, you know, 14 years later.
So what made you do this noble move to find it and just say, okay, peace out?
Well, there's definitely, you know, a couple of years of learning, studying, and really doing introspection and really like wanting to know, to get to the bottom of, you know, really what is it that I believe in as a Christian, and also, to be honest with you, you know, finding Jewish roots was a big part of it. It was a huge part of saying, you know what, I'm going to embrace this. Didn't know what it really meant, you know, at the beginning, but you know, as time went, you know, really understood, you know, the depth of it, you know, the beauty of it, and one of the main characters was David, King David, right? David HaMelech, a musician, and you know, I was just really drawn towards everything, really.
So now that you're here, you know, the song we just heard, a Hanukkah song. Why is music so important, you know, in Judaism to, you know, uplift us when many holidays are not festivals of lights and happiness like Hanukkah?
Right, so, you know, music is an expression, you know, of the heart. It's an expression of the heart, and in this case, the expression that we're giving, you know, with these songs, you know, for Hanukkah is I think it's definitely, it's important because of the fact that it's an expression, you know, it's an expression that's universal as well, you know, with everything that's going on in the world today, especially geared towards us, you know, one way that we can express ourselves freely without having any boundaries and it's music. Music doesn't have any boundaries. It doesn't have, you know, it's a language in itself. Let's say it's a universal language. And so I always saw the importance of music within every single holiday, every single Chag. You know, it just connects you a lot stronger.
Happy Hanukkah to all of you, and thank you so much for watching Jewish World Weekly. And without further ado, we are going to hear from Yosef Daniel. Take it away, my friend.
Thank you. מה רוצו ישועתי, לך נאה לשבח, תיקון בית תפילתי, ושם תודה נזבח, לעת תכין מטבח, מצהל נבח, אז אגמור ושיר מזמור, חנוכת המזבח, as